Welcome to this Climate and Nature Hustings, which has been organised by Melksham, the Environmental Group, and Climate Friendly Bradford Avon. We're very pleased to see you here with competing interests going on elsewhere. There are a few housekeeping things that I need to read out before we get going. The first thing is there is no drill anticipated, no fire alarm. So if one goes off, it's genuine. The exits are clearly marked. There's 2 at the front and 2 at the back here. This event is being live streamed on Facebook. So I'm asked to tell you to please mind your language.
Does that include us?
Everybody, I think. If you wish to participate when we get to the question and answer session, could you please put your hand up and somebody will bring a microphone to you. Obviously, if it's being live streamed, if you start talking without the microphone, it won't be caught. Please give your name and where you're from. Okay, now I have a few other things. The loos are at the back there, if you need to go. If there's a mobile signal makes live stream impossible, which I think is not the case. Actually, in this case, recording will be available afterwards. Now, one important thing, could you all switch off your mobile phones? I can see a few in front of you. If you're interested in this topic, climate and nature, there's a number of leaflets at the back on a table. So we would encourage you to take them before you leave. And if you're really interested, please feel free to join your local group. You're welcome to use Spencer's Bar. Graham, where's Spencer's Bar?
Through the doors there.
Okay. Ideally not until the session is finished. Now, we have 3 prospective parliamentary candidates here tonight. We have Catherine Reid from the Green Party. We have Kerry Postlethwaite from Labour, who's only available to us for an hour. And we have Brian Matthews from the Liberal Democrats. Both the Conservatives and Reform UK were invited but were unable to attend. I think they were offered alternative dates but were still not able to attend. But a statement will be read out from the candidates to the meeting. So, let me just check. I think I've more or less covered everything. I'll cover everything again later. Okay, so we're going to start with 2 minutes of statements from each of the candidates. And we'll start, Kate Nottage is going to read out Michelle Donelan's, as she's not here. Kate.
This is a statement from Michelle Donelan for this hustings. Thank you for the opportunity to present my views on climate change. This is not just a national issue, but a global challenge. When the UK took on the COP26 presidency, in partnership with Italy, only 30% of the world was covered by net zero targets. Thanks to the UK's effort, this figure is now at around 90%, and I am proud to have played my part at COP26. I believe that clean energy is key, and we will produce enough offshore wind to power every home, quadrupling how much we currently produce to 50 gigawatts by 2030, and supporting up to 60,000 jobs. We have decarbonised our electricity grid faster than almost any major developed economy, and are well on the way to our target of 95% renewable by 2030. In fact, our Conservative government has cut emissions faster than any other G7 country, by 48%, compared to 41% in Germany, 23% in France. But as important as cutting carbon emissions are, I believe that biodiversity loss is perhaps our greatest challenge. Farmers are the custodians of our countryside, and I believe that they should be rewarded for the environmental work they undertake on our behalf. The sustainable farming incentive will help farmers move towards sustainable farming practices, supporting farmers to build the organic matter, health and fertility of their soil, which is essential for sustainable food production and carbon sequestration. There is much more I could write about and much more to be done. However, I can assure you that the conservation and enhancement of the natural world are absolute priorities. Michelle Donelan.
Thank you, Kate. And now we have Catherine Reid on behalf of the Green Party.
Hi, good evening. So my focus is on environmentalism, sustainability and social justice, and this permeates through every policy. Needless to say, 2 minutes would not be enough to cover Green Party policies. So if you want to know what's the best manifesto on nature and climate, then Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth have done it for you. They scrutinised every party's manifesto and found, unsurprisingly, that the Green Party's was the best. Green scored almost a perfect result, 39 out of 40. The Conservatives an abysmal 5 out of 40. The other two parties not measuring up to our high standards. So if climate and nature are your priorities, then you know where to place that X. This morning I was listening to Kevin Anderson, Professor of Energy and Climate Change, and he's done some minute videos that perfectly encapsulate the situation, and this is what I want to share with you today. I'm just going to give you a flavour of what he said. We have no hope of holding on to 1.5 or even 2 degrees of warming unless we address the thorny issue of equity full on. Equity between nations is key. Wealthy nations who prospered on the back of fossil fuels are the primary reason we face climate change, and they now need to rapidly move away from fossil fuels ahead of the poorer nations, and to provide significant finance so poorer nations can leapfrog over the fossil fuel era. We are not all in this together. Small groups of people are responsible for most of the emissions. All the people that framed the debate are in the high emitting category, which is one of the reasons we almost never hear about equity within countries. The last thing the high emitters in our society want to do is make changes to their lifestyles. So we need regulation that drives rapid social change in our lifestyles and norms. Radical change is inevitable now. Rather than leaving the climate to wreak havoc and ecological collapse, it would be better to have an organised and structured change which involves much less suffering and more equity. The Green Party can offer this with fairness running through every part of the change that's coming. For real hope and real change, vote Green.
Okay. Now we're going to turn to the Labour Party and Kerry Postlethwaite.
Yeah. And apologies that I can only stay an hour, but I'm sure you understand there are lots of competing demands on our time. And like Michelle and Malcolm, I've made this hour available because I think this is an incredibly important issue. And I can imagine that everyone here is here because you are aware of the absolute urgency of the climate and nature crisis, and that everyone here wants to do as much as we can and as soon as we can. And I think we also have to acknowledge that from the position of global leadership that the last Labour government left us in on these issues followed 14 years of austerity, backsliding, whatever Michelle might claim, and now even climate denial. And Brian knows I always do this, including 5 years of Liberal Democrat coalition. So not only do we have a climate and nature crisis, but a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, a health crisis, a social care crisis, an education crisis, to name but 4, and there are many more, as we all know. So I think that we need to face all of these crises, not simply the climate and nature crises from day one of a new government, equally and urgently, in a joined-up way across government, with mayors, with local governments, with civil society, and with industry. And the only alternative to the Tories at this election is Labour, and committing to a decade of national renewal, including on nature and on climate. And I am really pleased that the Labour manifesto recognises that there is a dual climate and nature crisis, and as a member of the Environment Pressure Group within the Labour Party SERA, that is something that I have campaigned for a very long time, and it is something that I promised that I would keep working on, holding feet to fire as a member of a Labour government. And I'm really pleased that our Shadow Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, has clearly said that our manifesto commitments are just the start when it comes to climate and nature. Because start we must, and urgently. Plans are in place for GB energy, cleaner power, lower bills and more security by 2030, training and skills leveraging investment in technology solutions, warmer homes to cut fuel poverty, moving to a circular economy, tackling water pollution, a land use framework, community green spaces, a food and farming strategy, and the key word in all of that is transition, a just transition that takes people with us wherever they might be and doesn't pit them against us. A transition that turns this into a net opportunity for catalysing cross-sectoral investment and innovation, growth with environmental and social policies in the driving seat.
Thank you very much. And now we have Brian Matthew, who's going to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for coming on this hot day. I'm going to start with a quote from the astronomer and philosopher Carl Sagan, who wrote about this image of the Earth from space in the pale blue dot. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. And to cherish the dot, we must cut carbon emissions and protect our wonderful biodiversity. The Liberal Democrat manifesto includes the following to tackle the climate and nature crisis, and this is just a sample. Driving a rooftop solar revolution, including a guaranteed fair price for electricity sold back into the grid. Invest in renewable power so that 90% of the UK's electricity is generated from renewables by 2030, with net zero reached by 2045. Appoint a Chief Secretary for Sustainability in the Treasury and a new net zero delivery authority. Hand more powers and resources to local councils for local net zero strategies. End the sewage scandal by transforming water companies into public benefit companies, banning bonuses for water bosses until discharges and leaks end, and replacing Ofwat with a tough new regulator with new powers to prevent sewage dumps. Set meaningful and binding targets to stop the decline of our natural environment and double nature by 2050, doubling the size of the protected area network, doubling the area of most important wildlife habits, and doubling the abundance of species, and doubling woodland cover by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. In the absence of Malcolm Cupis, he has provided, from Reform UK, he has provided a statement, and Graham Ellett has kindly agreed to read it out.
All right, thank you, folks. I'm reading a statement here from Malcolm Cupis, who is the candidate for the Reform Party. It starts, "Let me start with a definitive statement. I am not a climate change denier, and Reform UK is not a party of climate deniers. The climate is unchanging, that is unarguable." I've snipped a considerable section from Malcolm, who provided a lot more words, but this is with his agreement. "You have to address the problem with the places which have the biggest outputs. Russia, China, India, United States and other nations around the world. And put simply, there is no political will in these places to do that. Mandating higher taxes, reducing freedoms, increasing costs and lowering living standards for people in the UK will not solve the problem. It might make a local difference in some ways, it might make you feel good about yourself, but it will not and cannot save the planet. What it potentially will do is increase the harmful emissions and seek control of the most vital and volatile region on the planet to Russia and China. We simply can't afford net zero. We can't afford the direct cost, we can't afford the tax bills, we can't afford the damage it does to our industry, and we can't progress with it when in reality it delivers no measurable benefit to the climate. And that is why our policy is to scrap it.
Thank you. I should perhaps have said at the beginning that I'm an emeritus professor at the University of Bath, and my area is sustainable energy and the environment. But I've got a self-denying ordinance that I'm not going to pick up any questions on any statements that I don't agree with. Okay, now, what we have is we're going to have a series of 3 questions which have been prepared by the organising group. Once we've dealt with these questions, we'll then go to the floor, and you can ask any questions that you like. If you would like to ask a question but you can't think of a question, I believe that there are a number of questions that the organising group have put together that you can pick up and choose one of those if you like. You'll have to forgive me if I stop a question that's too similar to one that we've had before. Okay, so we're going to start with rivers, and this is being Chris Holden is going to read this out.
Am I on?
Where is it
If
gone?
you press the button, no, you're not. You need to switch the microphone on.
There we go. Chris Holden, I'm a member of the Melksham Environment Group. For generations, children have swum in the River Avon locally. But this year, children swimming there have become ill. Given the abuse of our rivers and seas by the water companies, along with agricultural pollution, what would you do to ensure that our children can swim safely and that our rivers can once again become havens for wildlife rather than sewers?
Thank you very much, Chris. Just to give a little warning, I'm going to take this in reverse order this time, so Brian will be starting. So we have a question on how we clean up our rivers. Brian.
Okay, well, Chris, thank you very much. You will have heard in my opening remarks that the issue of sewage in rivers is very, very close to the Lib Dems, and you've probably seen all the things that have happened over that, including Ed Davey falling off various surfboards and other things to try and raise the topic. So the suggestion, what we would like to see, as we've said, is to transform water companies into public benefit companies, ban big bonuses for water bosses until the discharges and leaks end, and replace Ofwat with a tough new regulator with powers to prevent those sewage dumps. There's a lot of engineering that's needed as well, and there's need for a lot of investment. As you may know, I'm a water engineer in my kind of real life. Spent a lot of time with water aid overseas, so this is a subject that's very close to my heart. And what a pleasure it would be to be able to swim in our rivers again and not smell the stink of sewage, and see the kind of, the foam of detergents and God knows what else that's on the water. It's a really, really vital point, and we need to see not only our rivers clean again and our streams, but also the seas around our shores. And actually, I remember some years ago, I was on the Greenpeace boat off the coast of Wales when they were first pointing out the mess that we were making around our coasts. That was to some extent sorted out when we were in the EU, and of course we've been lapsing with those regulations since we've left. So we have to do something. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to move to Kerry.
Thank you, Chris, and I think it's really pertinent that you should ask that question today, because I think only in the last few days some children who were swimming in the Avon in Chippenham are now really sick as a result of having done that, and how sad that is that as children we were able to do that and to enjoy that, and that's not available to our young people today. And as people here will know, the Avon is the third most polluted river in the country. So what would we do to tackle it? A number of things. We have said that there will be no bonuses for water company bosses who frankly have been taking share dividends and massive profits at the same time as they've been polluting our rivers, and that should no longer be allowed. We've also said that we would take criminal sanctions against the bosses of water companies who continue to pollute our rivers. And we have said that we will monitor all outlets. At the moment, only a small proportion of outlets are measured. So we do not know, actually, if you look at devisers, We don't know what the actual state of the river is and where the pollution is coming from, because not all outlets are currently monitored, and we have said that all outlets will be monitored. I think it's also important that we do invest in that much needed infrastructure. It makes us all feel better, and it's right that we smack those water bosses over the head with criminal sanctions and with an end to their bonuses, but at the same time we also have to invest in the infrastructure that we so desperately need to make sure that our rivers can be clean and healthy for children to swim in, but also for nature once again. And it's interesting that Brian should raise the issue of legislation covering water quality, which came from the European Union. Michelle isn't here, but over the past few years, what the Conservatives have wanted to do is make a bonfire of all that legislation with their repeal of the European Union Law Act, and it is essential, and I'm really glad that I campaigned really hard not to allow that to happen, because that framework is essential and that framework has to stay in place and be improved.
Thank you, Kerry. Catherine.
I'm really sorry that children have got ill, and I think that's completely unacceptable. I think we need to be protecting our seas and our rivers from sewage dumping as a priority, because I believe that privatisation has definitely been a failed experiment. No other country has done this for their vital service. So we would take the water companies back into public hands, and we would stop this outrageous and dangerous practice. I mean, I'm not surprised they got ill, because here in Melksham there were 198 sewage dumps in 2023 into the River Avon and into Clackers Brook. And the Environment Agency states the brook is in poor ecological status, and that was caused by the water industry. The water companies only exist to pay dividends to shareholders, and 78 billion has been paid out over 32 years since privatisation. Money that really should have gone back here into our country and into infrastructure. Also, again, it's so important that we get legal protections, because since Brexit there has not been the strengthening of protections that we were promised. So what we would do is we would try and restore our rivers, and we would support the Environment Agency and Natural England doing their vital work and give them more teeth after being underfunded for so long.
Okay, now, thank you all for the answers to those questions. We now have a question on transport, which Graham Ellis is going to read out.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Public transport and transport in general is a reluctant thing to fall under carbon emissions. We've got more and more carbon from public transport as a proportion of from transport to transport is there. My apologies for reading this badly. I'm not a candidate. What would you and your party do to reduce the carbon footprint of transport about the UK? How would you bring better mobility to those without, which is about a fifth in Melksham, and those with their own vehicles in this and other constituencies?
Thank you, Graham. Now, just to so that we don't go to the same person each time for the first question, I'm going to start with Kerry, and the next question I'll start with Catherine. So, Kerry.
It's really interesting that you should raise that question. My friend Tessa from Belgium is with me today, and I picked her up yesterday at Swindon train station and took her to the car park where my car was parked in order to bring her back here. And one of the first things that she said when she looked at the car park was, "Oh my goodness, if I was getting off the train in Ghent, in Belgium, this car park would be a bicycle park, and there would be as many bicycles in this car park as there are cars in the one in Swindon. So how can they get that right on the European continent, and we've got that balance so wrong here?" And we then went on to have a conversation about how, as a cyclist, I would feel completely unsafe cycling on most of our roads, because we haven't built the infrastructure that we need to enable people to cycle safely through towns and rural areas. So I thought that was a really interesting observation. I think something that we have committed to is revitalising our bus service. I think buses have become uncool and untrendy. We all used to travel on buses, but we don't do that anymore for a whole host of different reasons. They're expensive. They don't go where we want them to go. They don't go at the times that we want them to go. And one of the things that the Labour Party has committed to through Louise Haig, our Shadow Secretary of Transport, is revitalising our bus network. So this is relevant to communities like Melksham. It goes where people want them to go. It goes to times people want them to go. It links them up to the services that they need to use. We are also committed to, as contracts expire, taking rail companies back into public ownership and having a Great British Rail network again. I know in Melksham we have a train station. It's not particularly useful. And people have to therefore drive to train stations in Chippenham and beyond. And our trains are always late. They are always cancelled. They cost a lot of money. And frankly, it's a lottery as to what ticket price you pay, and that's completely unpredictable. So as those lines fail to meet their contracts, we will take them back into public ownership, and as those contracts expire, we will take them back into public ownership, and we will create a rail system that actually works for passengers and for the taxpayer.
Thank you. Catherine.
Okay, so our transport choices account for a quarter of the UK emissions, and here in Wiltshire it's about 45%. So I think this is a key area to improve on and move to lower carbon options. But we should be making it easier and cheaper for people to move around and to choose greener options. Now I understand people need or are forced into car ownership, particularly in rural areas where public transport is lacking. Rural bus services have reduced by 52% since 2008. From a recent survey that I did in Melksham, not one person thought we had too much public transport, and the majority of residents agreed that there was too little. So to improve bus services, the Greens would put bus services back into local authority control and would give proper funding. That there would be a bus service to every village, and that under 18s would travel free on buses. And we put in 10 billion for bus and rail improvements. With rails, I think we can agree that privatisation has failed, and we would bring that back into public ownership as existing contracts end. And we'll invest in modern and efficient services. We'd also get some rapid electrification of rail and look at reopening lines and stations that give the most benefits. Now, not everybody takes buses and transports. Ideally, we'd all like to walk, cycle or wheel within our towns. And safe streets and active travel, that's really important to me. I've been pushing for a local cycling, walking infrastructure plan and a new cycle route for devices. I've instigated and run critical mass protest rides to campaign for safer streets for children. Active travel is chronically underfunded, but Greens will spend 2.5 billion a year. In context, this year's allocation was only 101 million. On new cycleways and footpaths with sustainable materials. We'd reduce traffic in streets and we would open up for community use. And we'd make sure that Active Travel England, Active Travel England's target 50% of trips in towns and cities to be walked, cycled or wheeled will be achieved.
Brian.
Well, as a Wiltshire councillor, I've had the pleasure of writing policy. We haven't always got it through. We like to think of ourselves as being the tail that wags the Tory dog on Wiltshire Council, usually coming up with good ideas, which they then sometimes take on. One thing, of course, that has happened nationally, and credit to where credit's due, is the £2 bus fare, which I think has encouraged a lot of people to get back in the bus, and that's a great way of seeing more people using buses. To run through our manifesto commitments on transport, we're saying make it cheaper and easier for drivers to switch to electric vehicles by rolling out far more charging points, reintroducing the plug-in car grant, and restoring the requirement that every new car and small van sold from 2030 is zero emission. Give more of the roads budget to local councils to maintain existing roads, including repairing potholes. Freeze rail fares and simplify the ticketing on public transport. Improve the rail network with more electrification, better stations, and reopen smaller stations. And locally we can think of the possibility of something for Devizes, perhaps, and various other places around the county where old halts existed on current main lines that could be reopened. And also give councils more powers to franchise bus services, and of course to see more cycling and walking networks. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the last of these opening questions is an overarching question, and Rowena Quantrill, who's at the back, is going to tell us what it is.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Rowena Quantrill from Climate Friendly Bradford-on-Avon. The economy, health, immigration and education have all been much discussed in the election campaign, but do the candidates feel that climate change and nature have deep effects on all of these? And if so, how?
Okay, thank you, Rowena. So we have a question on climate change and nature and how they interact with the economy, health, immigration and education. Something to get your teeth into. Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, climate change for me is the most important thing. We are in a climate nature emergency. We're not on target to meet our carbon budgets, and the last government were taking us backwards with the opening of new coal mines and issuing new oil and gas licences. So I think it's only the Greens that recognise the seriousness of the situation, and we have credible policies to improve things. We are being bold in our ambition, and we bring forward net zero society by over a decade. We'd have big moves on renewable energy, and we'd phase out fossil fuels. We would revoke recent fossil fuels licences such as Rosebank, and we'd stop all new fossil fuel extraction projects in the UK. We'd also end subsidies to oil and gas. We would be introducing a carbon tax on fossil fuel imports and domestic extraction, and this will be based on greenhouse gas emissions. We want to see the phase out of nuclear as well, and we would not be risking public money into carbon capture. But we all depend on the air environment, we all depend on the air we breathe and the food that we eat, and we know how everyone values the natural world. So I think we just need to be, it does impact everything, and you can make things better. Everything that we do to improve the climate, whether we're putting solar on our roofs or insulating our homes, brings all the cost of living down for everybody. So they're all interlinked. If we clean up our air, then health improves, and we don't have so many people going to the NHS, so that keeps the bills down. And there will be numerous examples of this. So yes, we do need to keep getting on top of our climate commitments and reducing the CO2.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you've only got to go outside to feel the heat wave we're feeling at the moment. And a yellow heat health alert has been issued for most of England until Thursday afternoon, meaning there is a potential for significant impacts on the NHS. In the United States, several Midwest states have seen extreme heat and flooding. In China, 8 people have died with recent torrential rains. And this is only the start. We're cooking our planet, and we need to turn down the heat. One of the things, of course, that we see and hear about, and the right wing tends to shout a lot about, and it is a problem, is the issue of immigration. People coming here illegally and all of those things. Well, I remember talking to Paddy Ashdown a few years ago as his driver one evening, and he told me how worried he was because climate change is going to drive that like nothing else. And when people need to move for their very lives, they're going to move. So, you know, these sorts of things are massively, massively important. Greenhouse gas emissions are running at 57 billion tonnes a year. We need to reduce them to around 35 billion by 2030. That's a massive task when you look at the graphs. But there are ways in which we can deal with it. Saving energy, of course, through better insulation. Switching energy from high carbon to low carbon sources. And we need policies that do that in the UK and worldwide. And the Lib Dems have them. An emergency upgrade programme to make homes warmer and cheaper to heat, starting with free insulation and heat pumps for those on low incomes. A rooftop solar revolution, driven by expanding incentives for households to install solar panels. And investment in renewable power, so that 90% of the UK's energy is generated from renewables by 2030. And I think I've run out of time.
Okay. Okay, now we come to the exciting bit where oh, sorry. No, I was through.
The exciting bit. Now I have to live up to that. Thank you, Rowena. And I think that comes back to the point that I made in my introduction about the fact that after 14 years of the Conservatives following out this country, we have many crises to face. And those crises are all interlocking. And I know you will have heard this a lot, and you're probably bored of hearing it, but the Labour Party has a mission-based approach to government, and one of the reasons why we have a mission-based approach is because these are all interconnected issues. They are all part of a system, and we have to address them all collectively. And I think the climate and nature crisis isn't an isolated crisis, and it has to be addressed as part of an ambitious overall government and growth plan. And I think our plan for climate action does offer the possibility for economic transformation, which will allow us to unlock solutions to all those other crises: employment, education, and health. Net zero could create millions of new jobs across the world by 2030, and we would like many of those jobs to be here. So we need a new approach to governance, I think, a systems approach, so that there is a joined-up approach to all of these issues across government. What I would like to see is a cabinet committee chaired by the Prime Minister on the climate and nature crisis, so that it is given complete emphasis and priority, and that it is joined up across secretaries of state for all those other issues. You talked about the health implications. One of the things that Michelle didn't talk about in her statement was the weaponisation by the Conservatives of the clean air issue over ULEZ, for example. You talked about immigration. Yes, absolutely, and we are committed to a target, aiming for a target once again of 0.7% of GDP being in overseas aid, and we are committed to making sure that British international development aid is focused on climate adaptation and mitigation in the global south, who are suffering from the fact that we have, over decades, caused climate change and pollution. You also talked about education, and I know that organisations like the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust are working with young people, particularly with young people who don't have exposure to nature, to ensure that it is something that they treasure and that they want to look after going forward. And it's also the reason, I think, these things are all joined up, why I support the Climate and Nature Bill, which would, as one of its many commitments, set up Citizens' Assembly for climate and nature. I think it's only by democratising governance of the climate and nature issue that all of our communities can talk about how they impact on things like local transport and local health and local education.
Now the second most exciting part of the evening. We're now going to go to the question and answer session. So if I can remind you, if you'd like to ask a question, if you put your hand up, and then Shirley, who's at the back there, will bring you a mic when I identify who we're going to ask. If you, as I said before, if you can't think of, you've got lots of hands up, so I think we're going to have a problem. But if you can't think of a question, then there are some questions on things like farming of food, housing, and energy. I think we could probably, without straining our timing, if people have sort of follow up on the statements that have been made, feel free to ask questions in that area. I think. Okay, I think this gentleman down here behind you, sir, was the first to have the hand up. Might come
Yeah. I've been a Melksham resident for a long time and interested in nature conservation and climate change. What I would like to ask the Labour candidate, I understand that the way that you're going to solve our problems with our public utilities, which badly have been run down by Conservatives for years, they're going to go for growth. Growth, all right. So growth, I understand, will entail using more of the Earth's utility of resources. So you're going to use more concrete, you're going to use more carbon, you're going to use more CO2 from gas and from the oil, and this is supposed to solve our problem. But what has happened is we all know that the richer nations have been taking the resources out of the world for years, and the poorer nations have been suffering. So I cannot see that having a growth strategy is the right way to go for climate change, and also to say it's a very poor way of redistributing the resources in the country, which the poor need very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll let Kerry respond to that, but I'll also give the other two candidates an opportunity to say anything they want on related topic. Kerry.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. But I think, we're currently in a situation where growth has flatlined in the United Kingdom for a very long time, and it is the poor who are suffering from the fact that our growth has flatlined, and they're suffering, I think, from a perfect storm of flatlining growth and growing inequality. And we desperately need to do something about that. We desperately do need to grow this economy so that we can have more investment in our public services, more investment in decarbonising the economy, more investment in benefits and in education and in our health service. But we have to do that in a way that is fair and that is just. And I think I said in my introduction that for me, it's not just about growth, it's about making sure that the climate agenda, the nature agenda, and also social justice are in the driving seat and determine how we shape that growth and what that growth looks like. And we have committed to clean energy by 2030 through Great British Energy. And we are going to invest massively in Great British Energy and making sure that we speed up that transformation. So rather than depleting resources in our striving for growth, we make that growth climate, environment and nature friendly. But if we don't grow the economy, I don't see how we are going to invest in the public services that everyone here knows that we need, how we're going to invest in the National Health Service, how we're going to invest in education, how we're going to invest in developing cycling networks or better water and better nature. But that growth... I honestly don't think that now is the time to be talking about raising taxes. I honestly don't think that now is the time to do that. I'm not saying that I don't want to. I'm not saying that that things may change. But right as we are now in the economic crisis that we currently face, now is not the time to be raising taxes on working people. Now is the time to be driving growth and to be driving investment. And I think one of the things that will unlock the green transition is enabling the private sector to invest in that transition. And they are crying out to invest in that transition. What they want are the economic circumstances that allow them to be able to do that. But as I said in my introduction, growth has got to be socially and economically just, and it has got to work for everyone, and it has got to lead to investment in our public services. It's got to repair the damage that has happened to us over the last 14 years.
Okay, the reason I cut you off so is not because without a mic you can't be heard on the live stream. Okay, Brian.
Thank you. I'm going to answer something before I get on to the growth topic, which I think is only fair. And Kerry made a point about the Liberal Democrats in coalition. Something that we did do when we were in the coalition and was the massive increase in the amount of offshore wind energy that was done. And that was really quite amazing. And of course that was Ed Davey, who is now our leader, who drove that when he was Climate Change Secretary. They say that the only thing that's sort of that grows forever is cancer. So I kind of get your point on that. But of course cancer eventually kills, and that's the danger for all of us on the planet. And it's often been said if everyone had the same lifestyle that we had, we'd need 3 planets to provide it. So where is that growth going to happen in a sustainable way? I think that's the big question. Some years ago I was involved in a project called The Reef. It was a conceptual project and it still may be built. It was to run across the Bristol Channel from Aberthorn in South Wales across to Minehead, and it would generate it from the tides flowing in and out every day, and it could still actually more energy, 30.4 terawatts of energy per annum, terawatt hours, which is rather just a little bit more than HTC. So, you know, there are ways in which we can have good investment in things which can be sustainable, and not only that, but if we build something like that, we can build others all across the world, wherever similar tidal situations exist. So the right sort of growth, I think, is what we need to go for. That's my personal answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine.
Yes, I agree with you. I think we do need a better measure of how well our country is actually doing, because we are one of the richest countries in the world, but people are struggling to put food on the table, and a small amount of people are hoarding obscene wealth, and shareholders are getting rich and sewage is dumped in our rivers. So we can do better than this. We can have a greener economy, and we can have cleaner, cheaper energy. And what we need to do is just ask those with the broader shoulders to be paying a bit more. We can have a carbon tax that make polluters pay. We can tax millionaires 1% and billionaires 2% to fund all the public services that we need. And we can spend $7 billion on climate adaptation. So investing in the green economy of the future might be expensive, but delaying will be far more costly in human terms, and damage to infrastructure caused by extreme weather events. So we cannot keep on growing. We must respect the limits of the planet.
Okay. There's a lady with her hand up there for the next question. I'm going to go to Kerry first again, because she might be leaving us at the top of the hour.
Thank you. My name is Isabel, and I've lived in this area on and off for a number of years, and actually was born near here. My question is about passive house building. Passive house building is a voluntary standard for energy efficiency in a building, which reduces the building's ecological footprint. Conforming to these standards results in ultra-low energy buildings that require little energy for space heating or cooling. Everyone agrees that we need more housing, and the Scottish Government have already legislated for passive house building, which comes into force January 2025. When will your party sign up for passive house building?
I think this is why we need to involve community experts and civil society in all these discussions, because I suspect, Isabel, that you know a lot more about passive house building than I do, although I have considered it for an extension that we're building in our home, and it is amazing. Yeah, and I know they do it a lot in, as the name might suggest, they do it a lot in Germany. I think we do need urgently more housing, particularly affordable and social housing for young families. I think what we can't do is let the perfect, which might be the passive house, be the enemy of the good, which is a warm and affordable home. We have said in our manifesto that we will double government investment to upgrade 5 million homes as a start. We have a warm homes plan, which will set up grants and low interest loans to support insulation and low carbon heating. And we have said that we will also leverage in investment from banks and building societies and others too, to deliver as low carbon homes. What we've also said, given that a lot of people, particularly a lot of young people, are living in the private rented sector at the moment because of the state of our housing market, that we will set minimum standards by 2030 for landlords on carbon efficient and warm homes, and that will save renters in bills. So I think passive homes lovely where it can happen and where that can be afforded, but as a first step I think it's that crucial investment in as many warm homes as possible, particularly in the private rented sector where so many of our young people are living in conditions that frankly many of us would not be prepared to live in at the moment.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Catherine next.
Certainly the Green Party would sign up for better house building, and whether it's passive home or equivalent, then yes, we would. Because our housing is in crisis, and this is after 40 years of governments treating houses as assets and not homes. Now, our priority is that everyone has a safe, warm and affordable home, and that it's fit for the climate changing world. We want a home that is warm in winter and cool in the summer, and is low carbon. And to achieve that, we must change regulations so that all new houses are built to passive house standard or equivalent. We require builders to put solar and heat pumps on all new homes. For existing homes, the Green Party would insulate them to EPC-B standard, all social homes and grants and private homes. We'd insulate public buildings, schools, hospitals, invest in heat pumps for homes, and we'd adapt homes to prevent overheating, because obviously, as you can see today, we're all really struggling here. So there is a system whereby the government expects local councils to bid for money. We would end that for social housing decarbonation fund. We'd make sure that every council had funding. I don't understand why councils have to bid for pots of money, and they may or they may not get it, and they put all that effort into it, and that's just such a waste of their times when they're not getting the money. So it would be far better if any government money that came, councils did not have to bid for it, and it was just given out. Anyway, that would go.
Well, it's a bit of a shame that we haven't got Michelle Donelan with us today, because, of course, during the Conservative years, the standards for building homes have gone down. And those standards were originally set during the early years of coalition when the Lib Dems were in the coalition. We would like to see, I'd love to see passive house standards everywhere. Our targets are big for housing generally, in that we want to see 380,000 new houses across the UK every year, including 150,000 social homes. But we've got to see that those houses are built to a proper standard, and we talked about already the idea of grants and what have you for appropriate heat pumps and solar panels and all of these sorts of things, especially for those that can't afford them. So yes, it's an aspiration. It's also interesting. In Cologne, which is one of the villages in my ward, there is a community housing association, and they want to. They're aspiring to it. They want to think about building, and they are looking at just that, at building passive house to passive house standard. We should be seeing that everywhere. But we've also, of course, got to think about all our old houses and how we deal with getting them back up to a good standard, because it's not just the new, we've also got to tackle the old. Thank
you. Kerry's going to leave us now, but so shall I just give you a minute to go?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry I have to go. I just have all sorts of competing things that I need to be at the same time. But I'm really pleased that I was able to come and take your questions, because it's a sign of how important this issue is for us, as I said at the beginning, unlike Michelle and Malcolm.
Thank you for giving us an hour.
Had I been able to stay longer, I absolutely would have. Thank you for your questions.
Okay. So, microphone is coming.
Thank you, Brian, for mentioning old homes. We live in a beautiful county filled with 19th century and older homes. What on earth are we going to do about them?
Yeah, well, I live in an old school, so I'm absolutely in that situation. In my case, half of the building is kind of new built because I built it. The other half is 18 1848 or something like that, and yeah, in the winter, it's, I'm shut off a little flat in the house really to survive. But yes, it's one of the things that needs to be tackled. I don't have a manifesto thing on that, but I'm just saying absolutely right, and hopefully I'll be elected and I can do something about it.
Catherine.
So there's no manifesto thing other than the Green Party would actually put some money forward so that we would invest in private homes as well. It's not just social homes, so that you can do the improvements that you need. I mean, old houses can have insulation put in. They could get their windows changed to be double glazed, and they can have solar put on the roof. So if you live in a conservation area or you've got a listed house, that is quite difficult. So therefore, I would think that the planning, we were to lobby for the planning to be changed to make these things easier. In fact, having solar on a roof, I'd rather you didn't even need planning at all. You should just be able to put it on. So I think the planning system probably needs to be looked at to help with that situation as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take the lady at the back there, and then I'm going to take this young lady down here afterwards.
I just wanted to. I just wanted to say to Brian that I meant to bring you all these papers and I forgot. But the Lib Dem manifesto does talk about supporting people in retrofitting and conversion. And I was hoping that Michelle would be here because, as you pointed out, the Sustainable Homes law, which was set to start in 2016, was cancelled in July 2015. And we've therefore lost 10 years where we could have ironed out all the snags of heat pumps and other forms of electrical heating, because heat pumps aren't the only solution. We could have started thinking, we need to improve the infrastructure of the grid, and we could have changed the electricity gas price ratio, because it's still far more expensive to heat a home by electricity than it is by gas. And especially if in the future a lot of people can't have heat pumps, it's going to be more expensive. And I'm sure that was talked about a few years ago when the fuel crisis was at its height, but it seems to have been dropped. And I will say that the Lib Dems have that on their agenda as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, I'd just say when the Lib Dems were defeated in 2015 and all of those things happened, I think the expression that Cameron used was "we'll cut the green crap," which just about shows the how the Conservatives think about these things.
Yeah, I had David Cameron's kept the green crap on my notes as well. He effectively set us back a decade when he banned onshore wind too, and he shut down the solar industry, and that has cost our energy, us that we pay the bills, billions more. And I'd also say that we say about renewable energy. Renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy. The reason we don't see that so much in our bills is because it is the price that you pay is linked to oil. So what we need to do is just decouple the price of renewable energy from the oil. And then we could have, when you're getting your energy from, I'm just going to say eco-electricity or whatever, or it's renewable, you should be getting a cheaper price, the price it actually costs to build, and not what the oil price is.
We're going to take this young lady here first.
You all spoke about infrastructure needed to help with the rivers. How are you going to fund that?
Infrastructure for the rivers.
Yes, the rivers.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think most of our funding is going to be coming from these extremely rich people. We'll have taxes to fund it and then distribute it around into things that we think are important. So we want to raise taxes, but we will put it back into our public services and we'll put it back into things that people find important.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, there are two main ways in which the Lib Dems thinking about raising tax, because that effectively is what will be needed. And it's not from the ordinary man and woman in the street. It's looking at the banks, because the Tories let the banks off the hook by cutting their taxes, and we would put those taxes back on, which would raise a considerable amount of money. And the other thing that we would look at is for over a certain amount, I think it's around £50,000, capital gains tax then increases, because capital gains tax has been used by multimillionaires effectively to pay themselves wages at very, very low rates. And so we would make sure that that way of dealing with the mega rich was stopped. The other thing we want to do is to clamp down on the tax havens and all of that, because again, the mega rich shouldn't be allowed to get away with blue murder on tax. Thanks.
Okay, I'll take one at the back and then I'll come to you. The chap at the back there.
Thank you. Duncan Robertson from Cologne. It's a question for Brian, really. Would you be able to expand on how you plan to reform the water companies? And will there be heavy costs associated?
Thank you. Thank you, Duncan. Well, what we have said is that we would transform the water companies into public benefit companies. Where you've got water companies effectively filling the coffers of their shareholders, and that money isn't going back into reinvestment, and that has been a major problem. So we'd also ban the bonuses. A lot of these company bosses have been receiving huge bonuses, despite the fact that their company's been behaving appallingly. So do I see this as costing a lot of money? There will be need for more investment, for sure, but we want to see that coming from proper regulation in the first place.
Okay, I don't think Catherine wants to come.
Well, I don't know the Liz Town's policy on it, but the Green Party would just take it back into public ownership, so it's simple.
Okay, I promise that I'll take Kate first. Can we have a mic down here, Shirley?
Farming and food. In what ways, properly funded, will you support UK farmers to A, grow good food, B, earn a decent living, and C, support biodiversity?
Sure, you get this one, Catherine?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I've got farming and food as headlines, so whether I'm directly answering your question now, but anyway, we'll say we definitely need food security here, because we are relying on imports, 80% of our fresh food and 50% of our vegetables. So what we'd like to do is increase domestic food production, but we'd also want to rebalance the power between the food manufacturers and local food networks and cooperatives, because at the minute the big food manufacturers seem to get all the say. We would regulate for fairness between farmers and the big food manufacturers and retail. We want to make sure that farmers get decent prices for the products that they grow. All children will have free daily school meals, and everyone will have sufficient income to buy healthy and sustainable food as well. And we're trying to bring in policies to stop food being wasted. Now, the impact of climate change does mean that our food is under threat, and it's along with the livelihoods of our farmers. So the way we produce food is also damaging to our countryside. Agriculture is responsible for 10% of emissions and the driver of nature loss and polluted rivers. And we've also had external shocks such as the Ukraine war, and leaving the EU has impacted on our food supply, and rural economies are really suffering. But we are looking to support our farmers, and what we're going to do, and we want to make land a carbon sink while securing a supply of food. We'll work with farmers to transform the food and farming system so we have healthy food at fair prices, and we get fair wages for growers as well. We would triple support to farmers for nature-friendly farming. We'd improve the health of soil, which will lead to cleaner rivers as well, and we'll link farm payments to a reduction in use of pesticides and agrochemicals. Hope I've covered some of what you asked.
Right.
Thanks, Kate. Well, we plan to introduce a national food strategy which will ensure food security, end food poverty and improve health and nutrition. We're planning to back British farmers with a £1 billion a year into a new environment land management scheme. We want to give Britain's fishers a fair deal, including tearing down conservative red tape that's hit them hard. We want to maintain high health, environmental and animal welfare standards in food production, but guarantee all future trade deals will meet them too, including banning cage hens and preventing unnecessary painful practices in farming. We want to give Britain's farmers the ability to trade with our European neighbours with minimal need for checks by negotiating a comprehensive veterinary and plant health agreements. We've seen the problems that are happening, in fact, right from the beginning of Brexit, in terms of British food producers being able to export to Europe. And this is self-inflicted. It could have been solved with a bit of nous and a bit of kind of proper negotiation. We've got to see that happen because it's absolutely stultifying our farmers in terms of what they produce.
Thank you. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to get you all in, so it's just a question of order. Yep, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, I've got 2 points. One, both about money. One's about cost and one's about possibility of raising money. So I think the idea of getting the water companies in as a public benefit company is great. But Wessex Water is owned by a Malaysian company. I've been in London last week and hearing all about the dire state of Thames Water and that the public purse is going to have to bail them out because you can't leave London without water and so on. How do you, without huge cost, transform something into a publicly owned company or public benefit company? So that's one thing, what cost. In terms of raising income, when I worked on climate change internationally, one of the things that the voluntary sector was always putting forward was a tiny percentage tax on every financial transaction, something like 0.01%, and it would have raised vast sums, and given the huge portion of our national income that comes purportedly from the financial sector, which also milks us all dry, surely that is something that should be considered, but I don't think I've ever seen it seriously proposed in the manifesto.
I think that was called the Tobin tax, I think.
Yeah, at one stage, yeah.
Who would like to tackle that?
Okay.
Catherine?
Well, your last point about the financial tax on translations, I don't know much about it because I'm not a finance expert, but it does sound like a good idea, so maybe it's something we ought to be looking at. With regards to the water companies and getting them back into public ownership, well, they were literally given away to those private companies in the first place. When they had them, they had no debt whatsoever, and they bought them for a song. And they've had income after income from us paying our water bills, and they've just given it away to their shareholders, and they've run up debt. Now, to my mind, we shouldn't be paying off that debt. And if they can't run a water company without getting into debt when they were literally given it, why should we bail them out? I wouldn't advocate bail them out. We should just take them back.
Brian?
Thank you. I love the ideas of a percentage tax on finance on transactions. Great idea. I'll adopt that. I can't really comment a lot more on that particular thing. It's interesting. I mean, I worked for a little bit with Thames Water some years ago, they hired me to look at a project which became something called Water and Sanitation for Urban Populations, which is an NGO. But the problem that we had with them was their lack of imagination, because we wanted to see something global coming out of that, which would really affect hundreds of billions of people across the globe. And they just wanted to make sure that they controlled the financial part of the whole thing, and it never really took off as it could have done. But that's another battle. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think this person here, Shirley. Okay.
I'm Alex, and I work for Devising District Food Bank, so I'm kind of here professionally, and I did until this morning think this was a general Hustings, so I didn't realise there was a climate like slab, but it's been great to be here. I'm really glad that the cost of living has come up a bit, because I do think they're really interlinked, and I was initially intending to talk to candidates about the cost of living and also constituent voices. So if they want to come and talk to me around social security and universal credit, I won't ask now because it's not really relevant to climate. But the question I did have, or the point, was around social housing, and I'm really glad housing generally has come up. I have worked with a group of tenants around things like empty social housing properties that don't have any carpet or curtain, any sort of insulation. And I think that is also an environmental issue. A lot of people will come to me and phone me up and say, I moved in the winter and it was freezing cold, and I just feel like there's a bit of a lack of or maybe enforcement of legislation around social housing. So I'd love to hear candidate thoughts on that. So I know there's the Decent Home Standard, there's things like AWAB's law based on mould issues, but that hasn't actually been passed yet. So I'm really interested in that decent homes around social housing. When people first move in, do they have that installation? And another really small point I'll make is Devices, where I live, as well as where the food bank is based, has a lot of boaters and a lot of kind of travelling communities, and they have been excluded from a few schemes that would help environmentally, like solar panels and national energy bill support. And they're a really vibrant community, and so are the waterways. So I just want to shout out to boaters and that maybe candidates want to build up a relationship with them. Wiltshire Council has done a lot. So just, don't forget the voters in Devices and Melksham constituency. Thank you very much.
So support for social housing and also waterways communities.
Alex, thank you for raising all of those issues. And actually I'm going to talk a little bit about cost of living as well, if I may. You may remember that we chased that issue about the money that was promised from to voters, and I was really pleased when we got that money through Wiltshire Council. It did actually manifest, so that was a victory. So we're talking about cutting people's energy bills with an emergency home energy upgrade program. We're also talking about tackling child poverty, and I think it's important to talk about these cost of living things. So I'm going to stray onto that, if I may, and that was specifically by removing the 2-child limit and the benefit cap. So we want to see that gone. We also, and I think this is, we've seen the films of the hardship that people are facing, but we want to reduce the wait for the first payment of universal credit from 5 weeks, which is cruel, to 5 days, and also replace sanctions with an incentive-based system. So that needs to change. The Conservatives always seem to have a kind of a workhouse mentality, and hopefully in a few days' time they will be history.
Might be a bit of a mishmash here, but the Green Party on social housing, we want to build 150,000 social housing, and when I say build, we want to make 150,000. They may not all be new builds. If they are, they'd obviously be to a high standard, so they would have solar, they'd have insulation. So therefore, bills would be low, so that would help with the cost of living. Some of the homes that would part form of that could be from empty houses or refurbished houses as well. So well, we did stay on to cost of living, so I'll stay on to cost of living as well, but get a few things out. Yeah, because most of us, we want to live in a country where everyone is treated with dignity, and we don't want people in poverty, and we don't want older people struggling to keep warm at all. And I know that food bank use in devices has really increased. There is 2,850 people last year, so, and a lot of those were children. So the reality for most people on universal credit in what isn't enough for them to eat, stay warm, or pay for housing, or have a fulfilling and healthy life. So I agree with the devices and district food bank that we need the essentials guarantee, and I pledged to support that. So additionally, the Green Party will increase the universal credit by £40 a week. We'd also abolish the two-child benefit cap. It's cruel. That would immediately lift 250 children out of poverty. We'd increase disability benefits by 5% as well, and we'd have a £15 a week minimum wage. Oh, sorry. £15. Did I say a week? Yes. No, I don't mean a week.
Right, I'm excited about this next question because the question has got a bumblebee and a ladybird on his T-shirt. So, please. Oh, we're waiting for Shirley. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm Cyril Jeffrey. I'm chair of the Quakers Walk Biodiversity and Community Group in Devizes. In the last 20 or 30 years, we've lost 60% of our insects. We've lost 80% of our amphibians. We've got increasingly segmented wildlife. There's no corridors as nationwide. The first question is, what is going to be done about it? The second question is, even if we stop polluting, we are sinking. What are you going to do about the coastal threat?
Okay. Good, thank you very much indeed. A couple of days ago I was with Wiltshire Wildlife at their headquarters in Devizes, and it was great to be there and to talk to them and to learn about what they were doing and the amazing programs with kids and education, but also what they were doing with linking with farmers and trying to see better farming practices. And of course, the whole business of the nicotinamides, or whatever they call these nasty chemicals. I mean, I'm sure all of you remember driving around kind of, 20 years ago, whatever it was, and you get bugs all over the windscreen, and that just doesn't happen anymore. And that's down to these horrible chemicals. And we've got to change it.
And I'm not on that. Victoria's tried to reinstate the
yes.
4 times.
Yeah.
4 times.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big thing. Let's see nature return for the sake of all of us.
You're right. We live in one of the world's most nature-depleted countries in the world. We've lost 70% of our nature. And we recognise how much people value it too, and we want to protect it. On Saturday, I went up to Restore Nature March, and I joined in with 100,000 other concerned citizens who are calling for protection of nature. I talked to 0 Hour on the importance of the Climate and Nature Bill, which I have pledged to support. And in fact, what am I going to say here? We've lost all our regulations, so now we want to bring in a Rights of Nature Act as well to stop nature being exploited for financial gain. That would set soil quality and phase out harmful pesticides. Additionally, we could have a Clean Air Act, and that would enshrine the right to breathe clean air. So Greens are fully committed to giving over 30% of our land and sea over to nature by 2030. We'd prioritise to re-wet peatlands, we'd reintroduce nature to our towns with hedgehog holes, street trees, swift bricks. We want natural regeneration, and we'd be increasing woodland. Wildlife Trust have said that the Greens have a bold plan, and they put nature at the centre.
Okay, I've clocked you 2, 3, and we'll come to you next.
So bearing in mind that the Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace report have said that the 2 remaining candidates belong to the parties that have got the best policies on the environment, I'd like to ask them, what is the political cost of a voter voting for the other candidate?
I think so. Okay, from the Green point of view, if people were going to be lending their votes to the Liberal Democrat, that's sending a message that you actually like the Liberal Democrats' stance on climate and nature, which isn't actually as good as ours. It's saying that you don't want green policies, you're not standing up for nature, because we have the best policies, and the only way you can show that is by voting green. So that sends a message to the current government coming in. I'd also like you to remember, unless you're voting Labour, you're voting for a backbench MP. So you want that backbench MP to be standing up for nature and climate as best they can and with the best policies. And I think that it's the Green Party that has that.
Brian?
Thank you. Sadly, until we have proportional representation, which we've got to see change, the only way that you're going to get the Tory out is by consolidating under one party, and that in this constituency is the Liberal Democrats. I'm a member of the Green Lib Dems. I'm a chartered environmentalist, and I've worked my entire life with the environment in mind, with various charities and what have you overseas, and this is so important. So people talk about holding their noses or whatever else. I don't care what you hold, but we've got to get these damn Conservatives out of office.
Okay, now there are three gentlemen at the back there. Let me start with the guy with the blue shirt.
Good evening. Tonight's brought out all sorts of interesting things. One is, and this isn't actually my question, but I'll just run through it quickly, the concern with the cost of renting houses. Any of us that are homeowners are very much guilty of pushing up the cost of renting because we've encouraged the rising cost of housing, because we all want a whacking great amount when we sell it. So that's an interesting one. The other thing as well, that you were talking about food and farming. Now we go to the supermarket and there appears to be a colossal choice of food because there's a colossal amount of brands, but the consumer's choice is actually very, very limited. It's a pure illusion because there's precious few transnational corporations that control the whole of the food around our planet, and they're all into bed with the governments around our world as well. So we're not going to change the price of food in the amount there is. In fact, we could even get less because the prime food producing countries are now suffering from climate change in so much as they've either got floods or they've got drought. And if you sort of study up on these things, it's surprising how much it runs on the knife edge. And that was a bit of a pun, wasn't it, really? And the other thing as well that's interesting is we all talk about doing this and doing that and spending billions here and spending billions there and taxing this and taxing that. The reality of it is we're concerned about food production. Should we be really more concerned about people production? Because we're just turning out people like there's no tomorrow, and there may be no tomorrow, because we all expect too much. We all live far too well, if we're honest about it. If you go back to our parents' and grandparents' day, which wasn't that long ago, in real terms, we live exceedingly well. Even those of us that may not have a great deal of spare money left over at the end of the month. We all live very, very well, and we expect far too much, and unfortunately our people production is one of the most successful industries there is. And if we have artificial intelligence and people have a lot more time on their hands, dare I say, people production might rise higher. So I'd like to ask the two people on the panel, which should you put the most priority on? Food production or people production?
Thank you very much. I said I wouldn't intervene, but just let me say one thing. the problem of population is not in the developing countries, because they consume very few resources. The problem is this end of the planet.
I don't dispute that for 1 second. You're absolutely right. But the reality of it is there's far too many of us trying to feed off of limited resources, whether they be in poor countries or wealthy countries.
Okay. Do you want to go?
Well, what can I tell you? I've spent an awful lot of my life living overseas in developing countries, and it's amazing what you can do with very little if you need to. And in many ways, we could learn quite a lot from some of those countries in living more simple ways, more simple lives. Of course, this country, we now have an ageing population, and that in itself brings its own challenges in terms of care and where that care is going to come from, and all of those points. You make some interesting points with that, but we have to learn, I think, to live more fulfilled lives, if not richer lives. And the way to do that, if we look back to the various times when we have had hardship, and there is hardship in families today, and I think it'd be completely wrong to say there isn't. But with the pandemic, for example, some people who were lucky enough to be able to walk and explore and discover nature were probably getting fitter than they had been for a long time because of that very possibility that they could get out and discover nature. And these things they don't cost anything. They're free. They're as God intended. And maybe that's what we all need to spend more time doing, is spend a bit more time enjoying that life, enjoying the free things and the good things of life.
Yeah, I agree with that. I
Thank
agree
you.
with
You can't be heard without the mic. Catherine.
I haven't gone up, but I agree with you that the wealthy do consume more, and what we probably need is just more equity around the place, where the wealthy consume less and the poor get their fair share. So, and we will need to use, but yes, we do need to produce food, and I think we also need to have a national land use strategy as well, and a 20-year plan, so we could map out food production. We could show where farmland is more or less productive. We could map land where we can store the carbon and support the nature, such as woodlands, and then we'd be able to have a better idea of what we could create, and we could make enough food for the people that are here, as well as combating climate change.
There's another chap with a blue shirt. That lady?
Just talking.
Okay.
Liz Watson, Bradford-on-Avon, part of Climate Friendly Bradford, the SWIFT group. I also support RSPB, the Butterfly Conservation and Wiltshire Wildlife. So I'm very keen on the environment and preserving biodiversity. Now, I'm glad we got talking about land and growing food, because I have an allotment. Can the candidates please outline their priorities in this constituency where you're hoping to be elected? For instance, would they oppose environmentally damaging planning decisions? And I know there's a couple in Bradford-on-Avon that are currently in everyone's mind, the old golf course, and also a proposal to, in fact, it's been passed, next to Avonlea Vineyard.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Catherine first. And then
Okay, I don't know the specific planning that you're talking about. I don't live in Bradford-on-Avon, I just live up the road in Bromham. But obviously, if you think it's environmentally damaging, then I wouldn't agree with it. I think we do need to put the environment first. Nature always gets a short shrift when it comes to planning. It doesn't seem to carry as much weight as other things. And they think that they can just mitigate everything, or you can adapt to it. Well, you can't mitigate things. You can't mitigate old hedgerows coming out or chopping old trees down. It just doesn't work like that. If you interfere with, are you in the bats zone there, the Trowbridge bat zone at all? Yeah, and the bats come through and they forage and they have their homes. Well, you can't really disturb that. Where are the bats going to get their food from? So I think that in planning, I think environmental and I think wildlife and nature needs to be higher up there, it needs to be given more weight in the planning system.
Well, you mentioned the old golf course, and I know that the former Liberal Democrat MP, Duncan Haynes, campaigned to keep that free from housing. And I believe it was well used during the pandemic for people to walk through and is still loved. And I will certainly campaign for that to remain land for the people. Thank you.
We're going to go to the guy with the blue. Shirley. Could I? Yes, him. Could I have a word in your ear, Shirley?
Yes, sure. Yeah, I'm Jonathan Francis, nature-friendly farmer. I'm actually the manager farmer at Avonlea Orchards, mentioned just 5 years a moment earlier. So yeah, we've been producing food locally for 20 years now. We get education, we get school visits coming, big peri-urban farming, environmental habitat for wildlife and stuff. And we've got this industrial development being built next to us that we weren't consulted about during the whole process. Sorry, okay.
Right up against it.
Thank you. And so yeah, we're battling that, and that's really affected us this year. But that's not actually my question. My question is, we also have a culture of burning waste in the area, and I've been reporting this to various organisations, the councils, environment agency over the years, and it's put strains on me with my relations with my neighbours, and also I get the impression that nobody really wants to find out the problem or solve the problem, and I'm worried that with increasing pressure through businesses trying to survive, that we're bringing in these laws and legislations, but corners are going to be cut, and unless we have really high fines and we take it seriously and we want to pressurise the perpetrators, the laws are useless. They don't make sense. That's my point. And how I've often thought, I've heard about in France, for example, I don't know whether this is true, but you can't have bonfires. If you do, the fire engines turn up, they put it out, and you get just a statutory fine that pays for all the costs. So a simpler system that wasn't involving local sort of neighbourhood neighbour conflict would be really appreciated. And I think there's a wider picture about having the law, but being able to investigate and actually make that law work in real life. In my case, fires.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me take my hat off to you for your work. I'd love to come and visit your place. It sounds really interesting. In one of my villages, we have Jamie's Farm at Box, and they do great work with the kids that come and visit and learn about nature and farming and all of these things. So well done. And I would seriously, let's talk afterwards. In terms of the business of clean air, yes, it's vital. Yes, I agree. I think, to my mind, I prefer to encourage people not to burn stuff rather than to actually find them. I take a more liberal perspective, perhaps, on that. But there are times when, yes, sanctions do need to be applied, no doubt. I kind of look back at fond memories of on my parents' small farm down in Devon, and the occasional bonfires that my mother used to like because she was quite a person with a bonfire. She enjoyed her bonfires. But of course, when it comes to dealing with organic waste, we should be composting it where we can. because that turns it into something that's useful rather than just burning it. That's the way to go.
It's industrial or plastic waste. It's not green.
Oh, okay. Well, if it's plastic, then that's horrible.
Yeah.
Number one. I was involved with a project in Swindon a few years ago. Sadly, it went bust. They were looking at taking film plastic that's difficult to deal with and turning it back into its constituent oils, which could then be used for all kinds of commercial uses. Not to burn it, but to turn it into new, effectively new feedstock for new plastic. Because if you've got a plastic, you can do that with in a clever way. You can turn it back into something useful. Now there is another project that started, I think it's in Newcastle. They are operating in Germany and in the States, and now they've opened up here. So this issue of dealing with plastic recycling, chemical recycling, I think is something that we really need to see much more of, and see plants that do it all over the place, because plastic is a very useful material, but it shouldn't become something that's either burnt or thrown into the sea. It should be recycled, and it can be recycled. Maybe there needs to be a cost applied to the people that use the plastic to make sure that it is properly recycled.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I do kind of sympathise with you, but the problem lies with probably the Environment Agency, because that has been completely underfunded and it doesn't have any resources to do this, and it seems to have lost all its powers. So the Green Party, we would increase their funding and we would give them the powers back as well, so that they can do their job. I agree there should be tougher sanctions against this sort of burning and waste, because sometimes it's just cheaper to pay the fine than actually clean up your act. I'm talking about, we would be bringing in a Clean Air Act. I don't know the details of it, but that might help make things easier to tackle things like burning. We'd also bring in a Rights of Nature Act, and that gives personhood to nature, but that means you can use the legal system then to protect nature, which I think we definitely need.
In consultation with my colleagues, we've decided that we will wrap it up in about 5 minutes or so, a little bit less than that. But the lady over there in green has a question. Perhaps that might be the last one.
Okay, I'll try and make it brief. My name's Debbie, and I'm here from Wiltshire Wildlife Trust today.
Debbie, your microphone isn't switched on.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try that?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, thank you. My name's Debbie, and I'm from Wiltshire Wildlife Trust, representing them today. I also live in the Melksham constituency as well. So our survey shows that 93% of people believe nature loss is a serious threat to humanity. And we'd like to know, what are the top 3 actions you want to see for nature and climate? And just on a personal note, how do you think those will impact us locally here?
Yeah, okay. Let me have a little look here a minute. Yeah, 3 things. Well, it's probably more than 3, but I suppose what we really ought to be doing is getting more renewables. We need to just move over to renewables. We need to stop burning fossil fuels, stop all the carbon and heating up our planet. We need to start putting a lot of our nature back. So we've committed to 30% of putting nature back. I have to think of another one. I'm sure there's more, but you've caught me on the hop now as the last question. I'm sorry.
Don't worry. Brian.
Well, James told me you were going to be here, and thank you for the question. We've talked a bit about the importance of nature and how we deal with it. I'm going to actually throw a little sample around here, because your group does an absolutely amazing job, Wiltshire Wildlife. Just put your hands up in the air if you're a member of Wiltshire Wildlife. Let's just see how many are. Well, that's a pretty good showing. That's a pretty good showing. So well done, everybody. So that's probably the first thing we need to do, is to see more of that. In terms of our policies, we've got to look at the way in which we legislate, with the way in which we deal with things like the nicotinamides, the way in which the insects have already been mentioned are being poisoned. We've got to value the wonderful nature around us, and encourage our kids to value it too, I think. And I know that you do great work in schools. I'd love to be a part of seeing more of that in the future. But we also need to sort of look more broadly and look at what farming is doing, and look at ways in which we can see regenerative agriculture, for example. Look at ways in which we can see soils built up and sequestering carbon in the soils, which can happen with regenerative agriculture. And I've been talking with some farmers about that. So, yeah, there's loads to do, hey, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the grounds of openness, both Rowena Control at the back there and myself are both former trustees of the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for the questions. We were worried that there wouldn't be enough questions. We obviously misunderstood that, and it looks as if Graham was going to say something.
I was just going to finish off here with two things. I'm jumping in probably slightly ahead of you, Jeff, here, in terms of thanking everybody who's come, the people on the platform, especially those who stuck it out, everybody who's come in the room as well, thank you. One of the things here, we still live in a commercial world, and unfortunately the folks who organised this are paying for the hall here. We have a bucket at the back, and we would love a contribution, thank you. I know I'll be putting something in, and we would like to. But I would also very much here like to thank Jeff for standing in that sitting in that rather difficult chair there. Although I think actually between the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, it's a relatively easy chair to be sitting in there tonight. So thank you for coming along. Thank you to Noel for all the production work. Thank you for all the team that has come together quite miraculously, actually, in a new constituency. Thank you.